What do you know about Canada?
Canada was a lovely place, wasn't it, back in the day? I always, it was actually the first country I ever travelled to outside the UK. Because before I was born, my mother was, she used to work in the Bank of Montreal. She lived in Montreal for 20 years, for a very long time. She was the editor of their magazine in the 60s, the Bank of Montreal magazine, so she had a very good job in Canada. Yeah. So, when I was only 1 year old, I don't remember it, that was the first country I ever flew to, and she was looking at, going and locating there. She didn't, so that's why I'm here in the UK still. But, I always thought, Canada was a very conservative, sensible, a well level-headed place. But
and maybe in the 60s it was.
Maybe even up to the last decade it was, with the 2000s. But it's just very, very sad to see how it's gone down the tubes, like a lot of other nations.
Canada has decided to go full speed on progress. Man, progress is mental. Canada is looking, and I say this as someone who doesn't live in Canada, Canada is looking insane from the outside. But before we go on and explore that, we've got a new feature on the website. If we've had a lot of requests saying, look, we can sign up, but we can't actually just donate you some money. And I never really thought about that. And now we have been demonetized on YouTube. It became suddenly something I had to consider. So if you would like to support us, you can go over and click donate if you don't want to sign up, and send us a $5 or something. Just say thank you for all the hard work we're doing, because we are, I think, doing a lot of hard work. And we'd really appreciate it, because, of course, we've got to keep the lights on, and YouTube doesn't like that. Anyway, you may remember in 2013 that Trudeau hit the headlines before he was Prime Minister of Canada for saying that he admired China's basic dictatorship.
How can anyone admire a dictatorship if they're the leader of a democracy? That doesn't make any sense, does it, at all? What a thing to say.
Would you like the quote?
Yes, please.
He says, there's a level of admiration I actually have for China. Their basic dictatorship is actually allowing them to turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green. We need to start investing in solar.
They're not actually investing in solar, are they? They're actually building coal power stations, which actually is quite sensible. But Canada would do the same. They might have cheaper energy, but...
Well, it's a remarkable statement because, as you say, China's the leading source of carbon emissions. And, I personally don't know what that means, but Trudeau, having a particular green agenda, should surely see that as being a monumental evil. But the point he's making is he respects the fact that it's a totalitarian country because the person at the top can just realign the entire civilization in a different direction.
They can do what they want without this pesky democracy or freedom or liberty or
accountability,
free speech or personal opinions getting in the way. They can just ride roughshod over all the people and do what they like.
Really tells you a lot about Justin Trudeau, doesn't it? But and so this particular line, the reason I bring it up is because he seems to have a very strange relationship to China, actually. Weirdly permissive of China, which I think is, and it's the same in New Zealand as well, actually. They have a weirdly permissive relationship with China, which is weird because, like, you understand these people are obviously wolves, right? They're obviously out for themselves and to improve their standing in the world. And I don't even blame China for doing that. Obviously, they're going to do that. But then we need to have a particular understanding that that's the agenda that they're following and act appropriately. And China has not been acting appropriately in this regard. And like I said, this particular quote has come up a lot in the Canadian media. And this is only from 2021. This is still going. This is just one example of this. I just searched this quote and then pulled out just the first things that I found, because you can see this is something that people are not letting go. And that's good because, like I said, Canada has a strange relationship to China, right? So this is in 2021. Where they were having joint military exercises with the People's Liberation Army. It's like, why?
It's very strange, isn't it? For a country that's in NATO, I mean, I'm not a fan of some of the things that NATO are doing at the moment, obviously, but for a country that actually is in NATO to be having military exercises with China is beyond belief, isn't it? Well, I mean, what other NATO countries are having military exercises with China? I know. I don't think any.
It's really, really bizarre, but it gets weirder, right? So this is from the Canadian government's own website, right? They've got a couple of Q&As on here. Why is the Canadian Armed Forces engaging in military exercises and defence activities with the People's Liberation Army? I mean, that's a great question because you would think that the People's Liberation Army would be the thing you would be expecting to defend against if you were Canadian. So why are you engaging these joint activities? And their answer is, we're committed to remaining a reliable player in the Asia-Pacific region through consistent engagement and strong partnerships. So, okay, but you're not... surely you would be like a consistent, reliable player with Japan...
Yeah.
Or any other
Australia.
New Zealand. Well, no, maybe not New Zealand.
Yeah.
Well, no. In an ideal world, New Zealand, you know, the Western aligned countries and not the China aligned countries, and especially not China itself. But they say the Canadian Armed Forces have not engaged in bilateral training exercises with China in 2019 and 2020. Well, obviously because of the coup. In parallel with the whole of government reviews of Canada's approach to China, National Defence is currently reviewing its engagements with the Chinese military. Canada would like to continue the Asia-Pacific region in a manner that promotes peace and security around the world. So, right, but inviting the Chinese in and giving them a seat at the table, is that promoting peace, or is that allowing them to have access to what you know when they shouldn't? Right.
Well, we have the United Nations Security Council with 5 members. Surely that's the forum to actually try to promote and maintain peace and security. And I think we do have to do that actively because we could get into a third world war and we want to avoid that. That's got to be the number one priority for all prime ministers, presidents and kings and whatever around the world, to avoid a World War III. So, you know, we obviously do need to engage with China and, you know, with a lot of wisdom and tact and diplomacy.
And
doesn't mean you ally your armed forces with them.
Yeah, you don't invite the Chinese military to, say, attend a military science conference in Canada, which is what happened last year.
Like, I think they probably know what was going on anyway, but you don't need to openly flaunt it.
Quite possibly, but this was weird. So a few Canadians were detained in China, and in fact, on the previous one, they say Canadian. If pressed about Canadian citizens detained in China, Canada remains deeply concerned about China's actions. It's like, okay, so they're detaining your citizens, and you're like, yeah, so just keep coming on to our military conferences, right? 3 days after Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavro were freed from a prison ordeal in China, the Chinese military made a surprising request to Canada's largest defence university. It asked if some of its personnel could attend international military sciences conferences at the Royal Military College. The theme of the academic meeting was resilience and cohesion in the face of new forms of disruption, and one of the sessions dealt with China and Russia's information space attacks on democracy.
You're inviting China to a session where people are discussing the threat from China.
Yes.
That doesn't make any sense at all.
Well, the Chinese said, could we attend? And the request rose up to the Department of National Defence ranks to the Deputy Minister, who allowed it. And so the Chinese got to Zoom call in to this session of how to defend against Chinese attacks on democracy.
Kind of defeats the object, doesn't it?
What are you doing?
That's absolutely crazy.
You're
I've never heard of anything
like,
so ridiculous.
And so it was kind of redundant when the Canadian government was like, yeah, maybe we're going to have to start clamping down on these Chinese spies. It's like, why not? Why bother? You just literally invite them into the Zoom meeting.
Yeah. Why not just put Chinese cameras everywhere so they can like watch everything that goes on?
Why not? Right. So Trudeau's government will stop funding military projects affiliated with universities, institutes, or labs connected to foreign military, national defense, or state security entities. It's like, that's all well and good, right? But China is a totalitarian state, and a totalitarian state means there is nothing outside of the purview of the government. So anything Chinese that the Canadian government engages with is ultimately at the discretion of the Chinese government. I mean, you remember when the Chinese government just started confiscating the wealth of billionaires. They allowed these capitalist enterprises to spring up, and they were just like, right, now you're gone. And it's like, why? Because they can do that, because they're a tyrannical communist regime. That's what they do. So Trudeau, it started becoming obvious that the Canadians were acting as kind of a siphon for Chinese spies to send information and technology back to China, which is what has been happening in American universities as well, constantly. Chinese spies are constantly getting caught. Sometimes they sleep with American senators and nothing happens. It's okay, this is so weird. It's like a totally open funnel going into China. So what are you doing?
There's so many Chinese students in universities all over the West. I mean, in the UK, in the USA, all over. So you have no idea which of them are actually independent and there for their own benefit to learn maths, or who is there on behalf of the state feeding back information to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, probably a lot of them would only get permission to leave if they were members of the party, I imagine.
Well, this is precisely the problem that Trudeau's government encountered, actually. The Globe and Mail reported that 50 Canadian universities had extensive research collaborations with the Chinese military. And there's, this means that a lot of people who are literally in the Chinese military are involved with Canadian universities. It's like, look, you can't, that's such a wild risk to take. Let's assume nothing bad happened. Just having that door wide open is crazy.
But this infiltration, it's too late to stop now. I mean, you hear it says in the Canadian universities since 2005. I mean, here in the UK, we've got Huawei, and there was a lot of sort of worry about what those Huawei systems would do if they were integrated into our mobile phone systems.
Well, that was the thing. They were thinking about allowing a Chinese company, again, there's no such thing as an independent Chinese company. They're all in some way organs of the government to control the telecommunications infrastructure for the United Kingdom. Are we mad? What are we doing? Right? But anyway, Canada's still in this position.
Yeah.
And another thing that is interesting that happened in Canada, I hadn't heard of this until the other day. Apparently there are Chinese police stations in Canada, in places like Quebec and Montreal, where these are undeclared police stations where the Chinese state is funding what appears to be kind of like a Chinese colony to police their own citizens overseas. And so they pick these people up off the street. And speaking to the media on Thursday, Justin Trudeau said they are an issue his government are very concerned about. How do they exist?
I've heard of them in London. But I haven't heard of them in Canada until now. So, I mean, this obviously is going on everywhere. And the question is, how long have these been in existence?
Well, that's a great question. It wasn't just Quebec. It was also Montreal and a few others as well, if you go to the next one. But this is not just in Canada, of course. Apparently, there are 100 of these around the world, according to CNN. If you go to the next one, there are over 100 of these across the world. And some of them with the cooperation of the nations that they're in, which is weird. But anyway, carrying on Canada's strange relationship with China. I know I'm doing a lot on China and Canada. I have more. It's just there was a lot of this to go through. The Chinese decided to intimidate, shall we say, Canadian officials. And so the Canadians said, we're not going to be intimidated by this. And so they kicked out a Chinese diplomat. And so the Chinese decided to kick out Canadian diplomats because, of course, they have a position of honor to maintain. What's interesting is that they the Chinese state issued a response that was essentially like, "How dare you, sir?" And it's like, everyone can see what you're doing. Like, everyone can see that China is taking predatory actions to infiltrate and steal and undermine. This is not a friendly country. This is a country that will pretend to be friendly while stabbing you in the back.
Well, they've got a 100-year program, haven't they?
They do.
Started by Deng Xiaoping. So with their Belt and Road Initiative, they want to... I don't blame them. They're doing the best for themselves. This is an entity, the Chinese Communist Party, that wants to be the number one government and control everything in the whole world. They want to be the prime nation, as stated. So they're telling you exactly what they want to do. But you're silly if you open the door to let that happen in your own country. So, they should have seen that coming. But so he obviously didn't see it coming. And then it's happened for a little bit, for a number of years or decades. And then he's like, whoa, this is happening. I didn't see it. I've got to do something about it. But it's, just expelling one diplomat, it's too little too late.
It really is. But at least it shows that the Canadian government's like, okay, maybe we shouldn't actually be sitting down with the wolves and asking them what they'd like for dinner. The lambs that they are. Anyway, there are other insane things. There's a bill called C-18 that I think was called Bill C11, but has been renamed C18. Or honestly, it was unclear from BBC reporting what the deal was on this. But this is a new law that makes tech giants like YouTube and TikTok support Canadian cultural content.
It's like compelled speech, isn't it?
It is compelled speech.
Yeah, like you must say this 30% of the time.
You must have an algorithm that promotes certain things, right? If only there was a certain Canadian professor who warned about the sort of compelled speach.
If only. I wonder where you might find one of those.
Yes. In exile, actually, at this point, is basically where you'd have to find him. But the thing is, the final regulations are actually still unclear, but the issue seems to be that the Canadian government wants to promote particular Canadian content creators. Like Lauren Southern probably isn't getting on this program.
No.
But there will be left-wing content creators and Indigenous Canadian content creators and things like this. YouTube, of course, have been opposed to this, saying, well, look, we want to run an open algorithm where essentially the algorithm is customized to the tastes of the user rather than the decisions of a government. And one of the rare occasions I have to stay in YouTube's corner and say, no, that is actually the way that things are. There are a bunch of even Canadian influencers who are just like, no, I don't want them to start essentially hamstringing me and promoting government approved creators on the platform. But that is what will happen.
Well, as much as I hate globalism, YouTube is a global service, if you like. It's a global platform. And I don't like some of the things that they do and the way they operate. But, like I would say with you, I would, in this specific instance, say, well, it should be left to the market to decide what people engaging in that market want to listen to rather than forcing certain things at them.
And it's not like YouTube doesn't do enough algorithmic manipulation anyway. But forcing, I mean, there's one thing like YouTube doing their own algorithmic manipulation, which at least on a sort of, on a free market level, I can be like, well, they are a private company. They get to have the algorithm they want. But now if it's, but the thing is, there is another argument saying, well, this is actually somewhat of a problem, the fact that they don't have any kind of government constraint. So difficult on both sides, but the thing is, I really wouldn't trust the Canadian government. I mean, they literally say they want to clearly promote and recommend Canadian programming in official languages as well as Indigenous languages. So it's going to be woke trash that nobody wants to watch. That has to be force-fed.
But on the other hand as well, they're doing this with one hand, and on the other hand, they're bringing in sort of hate speech regulations. So, you can have this kind of content, but certain Canadian content creators, they get no platforms completely. So they're not going to get on this algorithm, like you say.
It's not going to be Rebel News who gets about it.
That's true. That's a very good Canadian media company.
Exactly. This is the example, I would say. This also applies to Facebook, otherwise known as Meta, and Facebook are just threatening to remove their content from Canada if this comes through, which honestly would be probably a benefit to the Canadian public. Which ironically though, it puts Nick Clegg in conflict with the Canadian government.
I never saw that coming.
Right.
I've lost touch with him, hasn't he? Just gone to ground, hasn't he? But he's still there
he's the
Facebook
content manager for... Yeah, he's the manager for Facebook. So now Nick Clegg is against Justin Trudeau, when on every other thing they would have completely agreed.
Wow. Two liberals having a liberal fight.
Exactly. Yeah, who's more liberal? But yeah, anyway. So then let's move on very quickly to Canada's population. So Canada has a population in total of 38.25 million. And in the last few years, they have, of course, like everywhere else, had inflicted upon them mass immigration. So now 23% of Canada's population is first generation immigrant. That's wild.
23%, like first generation, so have moved to Canada from somewhere else. So that's
let me correct. Belong to, quote, visible minorities, according to that. So they may well be second or third. But only 3 in 10 of them are born in Canada. So of that 22%, 70%, so about 18% of Canada is first generation immigrant.
That's huge, isn't it? That's
massive.
A huge millions, 5-6 million people that migrated to Canada. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this has massive demographic change and massive implications on the social cohesion of a society, doesn't it? And also politically, because a lot of people coming in are more likely to vote for certain political parties that are pro-immigration. So this is why they do it, and it feeds back.
Yep.
And then if you don't sort of cut that loop, then it will just go on forever. There'll be no way of stopping it because they bring people in, they vote for the party that brings them in, then they bring more in. You get chain migration and so on. And
for a country with only less than 40 million people as well, Canada has a staggeringly high per capita rate of immigration. In 2021 and 2022, they got 400,000 people in, which is enormous for a country of that size. That population, and they're planning to increase that to 500,000 people per year.
Like it's a target.
It's a target. That's exactly right. It's a target, right? That puts the immigration levels to Canada at 0.7% per year compared to, say, the United States, which has massive immigration anyway, at 0.3%.
Gosh,
so it's a huge increase in the number of people coming in. And then you have people in Canada whining about the coronation of King Charles. Why? Well, it costs us money. And this article makes an argument that one day the monarchy might start controlling Canadian politics. It's not going to happen.
Doubt it very much.
It doesn't even control British politics. It's not going to control Canadian politics. But the complaint here was really based around the cost. This cost $100 million, which is something in American dollars, which is something 167 million Canadian dollars, which was 5 hours of NHS spending. Just in case you were wondering. The entire coronation would have funded the NHS for 5 hours.
I don't know why Canadians are complaining, because they didn't have to pay for it anyway, does it? It was the British taxpayer
we
that paid for it. I don't know what the problem is. But
How much in the way of Canadian tax is paid for this? But the thing is, interestingly, Canada spends $300 billion annually on their healthcare, right? That's a lot of money for such a small country, right? And so what they're complaining about is the King's coronation was 0.06% of Canada's euthanasia budget. And I say euthanasia budget for a reason, because Canada has a very strange relationship to the concept of the right to life, in my opinion. If you go to the next one, John, they want to extend euthanasia laws to include people with mental illnesses.
I mean, they didn't have euthanasia until very, very recently, did they? Isn't it? It's within the last decade. I'm not sure the exact year that it was brought in, but this would have been unthinkable 20 years ago that you would have even had any euthanasia, would you? And
now it's the sixth leading cause of death in Canada.
That's dreadful, isn't it? I mean,
10,000 people a year.
They say, it's only going to be for a few people who are in severe pain, and then they expand it and expand and expand it, and now it's like, people who are mentally ill, maybe people who are poor. Maybe.
Let me get you on that one. No, you're exactly right. Right. So I mean, the way this is framed, we'll get to the poverty in a second, actually. But the way this is framed, as you say, like people who are physically suffering, right? If you're in constant pain all day, every day, I can see actually a valid argument. Say, look, I would like to die because it's never going to get any better. I'm just waiting 6 months until I die, or you could just have a nice ceremony for me and then I could go now.
I probably would disagree with you on that. I can see that.
No. I'm not saying I'm in favour of it.
Yeah, but
I can see that as being quite a strong argument, right? And it could go either way for me personally on that particular case, right? But that is because the person is in a position where they can never recover. It's just constant suffering, and they are conscious and are able to fully articulate what's going on, right? They're very aware of what's happening. They're not mentally ill. And the thing about mental illness is it's usually an exculpatory excuse for if you have committed a crime, for example. I wasn't fully in control of my actions. So how can a mentally ill person ever really make an informed decision on the consent to kill themselves? Well, that would be something I would have thought. But the problem with public health care is those mentally ill people, they're holding up the balance sheet.
The courts would decide, wouldn't it? This is what the very dangerous and disturbing thing is. People who are mentally ill usually often get made wards of court. So the court becomes what the person who makes decisions on their behalf. And they can decide, this person, they need to die.
They're clearly suffering from extreme depression. Maybe they should just kill themselves, says Canada's official position on this, which is mental. But going on to euthanasia, what does the Canadian public think of euthanasia? Well, when polled, 27% of people think that people should have access to euthanasia because of poverty, which rises to 41% between the 18 to 34 demographic.
My goodness.
Poor. Don't just kill yourself.
I thought, younger people who are more socialist, if you like, on that way of thinking would be more in favour of helping people who are poor, not bumping
not
them
killing
off.
them. Yeah. Homeless. Well, 28% of Canadians think you should just kill yourself as well. Yeah, you need access to euthanasia. Why? Because you don't have a home. Well,
why not?
Can't I be given some sort of charity?
Well, if you come, if you come as a migrant, you're probably given a home straight away, aren't you? But if
you're shuffled straight into the hospital, not got a home. 43% believe for mental illness, which seems mental to me. Goodness. But what's crazy is 50% of Canadians think being disabled should qualify you for euthanasia.
So that's the next one along, isn't it? From someone who is in severe pain, and then it's disability, and then it's mental illness. But you see, this is a progression. And what you introduce it once for one small category, and then they use as a wedge to bring it in. Oh, it's only going to be for a very, very tiny number of people, but then that expands and expands and expands.
Disabled,
and before you know,
homeless,
you got these categories. People who are poor, people who are homeless,
earning less than 20 grand a
half
year.
the country would be up for euthanasia.
No, that's exactly right, and that rises to 60% amongst the 18 to 34. But the thing is, what this is doing really is mainstreaming the conversation on eugenics again, because this is a eugenicist program. If you're mentally ill, if you're disabled, or you're poor, then maybe you should just be killed because you're an inferior kind of human being.
Goodness me.
It's just incredible how Canada has progressed so very much.
This has happened very quickly, hasn't it? I mean, this sort of inversion of values. Yes. I mean, the groundwork has been laid for many, many decades, but it's just since about 2015, things have just flipped. Yeah. And in a way that is quite frightening. Yeah.
And when surveyed, 73% of Canadians are in favour of this practice under the current guidelines, which are, not great, but you've got to be at least 18 years old and mentally competent. So the mental illness aspect has to be taken out of that. And have a grievous and irredeemable medical condition, and then make a voluntary request for this. But the thing is, I've seen reports of people saying, well, I got an email or a letter from the Canadian government. There was one, he was disabled and needed a stair lift, and instead he got offered MAID. And it's like, no, I want a stair lift. I don't want to be killed, you lunatics.
That's not a voluntary request, is it? That's sort of putting that's to some level of coercion or suggestion.
Yeah, exactly.
Which shouldn't be allowed in that case.
Yeah, the charisma of government offices definitely informs the way that people think about how things should be. And to have that as the case is just mental. So anyway, Canada is a mad place, and it seems to be getting madder by the day. If you're Canadian and I'm wrong about any of this, let me know. If you're Canadian and I'm right about all of this, well, I'm so sorry.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this episode, and why IQ is not a good measure of intelligence. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.